Good morning and welcome to The Point. It has been an interesting week here on Mackinac Island as we attend the policy conference sponsored by the Detroit Regional Chamber. A lot of issues were discussed that involve connecting east side to west side, the rebuilding of Detroit, that big financial plan that still has not passed the state legislature, and of course, what are they going to do about roads? One of the items that was taken care of just as this conference got underway was a new minimum wage law, and those are all things that we'll be discussing in the future weeks. Also this week, we had a chance to talk to both the Republican and Democratic major party candidates for governor and U.S. Senate. And again, you'll see more of that in an upcoming show. But this morning, we continue with our look at primary races for the State House, this time in the 58th District, that's Branch and Hillsdale County, where Kenneth Kurtz, a Republican, is term limited. 7 Republican candidates are vying to replace him. This morning, you'll hear from them all. You're running for State House of Representatives. It's a crowded field. A lot of folks are running for this race. I asked them all the same question to begin with. Why this race? Why now?
Not only was it a very effective time for me, but I've always had the belief that more voices are always better than fewer. So I think it should be a very good conversation for the next 3 months for all of us.
As you see on this show today, there are a lot of voices in this race. It is an open seat, and we have seen since the inception of term limits the fact that every 6 years as a seat comes open, in some areas at least, that field of primary candidates gets bigger and bigger. What are the issues that bring you into this campaign? What is it that you see as the most pressing needs for your district?
I have been very pleased over the last couple of years with the current administration and their attempts to turn the economy around through reducing taxation and reducing regulation. My time in small business prior to this, I had a window into just how destructive onerous taxation, over-regulation, too many fees, and overall business unfriendly environment was destructive to me and the individuals who lived in my facility. I had a retirement community at the time, and consequently you spend enough time doing that, you really want to stop complaining about it and try to make a difference. And from my standpoint, I believe in creating a business-friendly environment to encourage businesses and entrepreneurs to invest, to expand, and to hire, and consequently to add to the tax base. And that's what we need to do to turn these small communities around and bring our property values back.
You talk about small communities, and that's an interesting case study because when you look at bigger towns or cities within the state, they obviously have a little different basis of income and taxation opportunities. But in smaller, more rural areas, there has been a long-lasting effect from the recession that we saw first in Michigan and that spread across this country. What do you think about when you look at these small areas? What are some of the specifics you might want to try to implement to get business kick-started, to get people back into housing, to get those tax rolls built back up?
Our number one concern in largely Hillsdale County and also Branch County is a qualified workforce that really wants to work. That's what a lot of the employers are looking for. Now, we have a tremendous amount of opportunity down here because we've got a decent quality of living, we've got a decent high standard of living, we've got a low cost of living. So consequently, if an employer, and hopefully a larger scale employer, needs a large labor force close to Detroit, close to Chicago, Indiana, Ohio, on over to Ontario, this is a very good place strategically to locate. So we've got the pieces, we just need to bring those pieces together, and creating a good business environment with a low tax rate, a tax rate that's even and fair for everybody, combined with reinvesting in our infrastructure, which is one of the number one concerns for a lot of companies, especially the ones that are working logistically internationally. We can lure business here, and we need to do that not so much by picking winners and losers, but really showing them the advantages that we have and really leveraging those advantages. So,
when you say infrastructure, I hear roads. That's been one of the conversations that's been going on in Lansing for a long time. It goes all the way back to the Engler administration and beyond that, but I've been covering since the Engler administration. Right now there are a number of proposals that say that $1 billion a year needs to be raised for roads. What's your take on what you need to do to fix that infrastructure?
Let's go with the figure $1 billion, $1.2 billion. My number one concern is net, we're the 5th highest fuel tax state in the country, and that's one of the problems there. So the first thing we need to do before we have a knee-jerk reaction to raise taxes on fuel and create a less competitive environment, we need to turn around and we really need to look at where our dollars are going and make sure that the dollars we are raising through revenue are going to the most efficient means. Once we've cut the fat and we've cut all the waste out of it, and that has been proven, then we can turn around and go to the taxpayers and say, okay, we want to do this to raise a few revenues. But on the same token, it is crucial that we prove to the taxpayers that they are getting the roads they deserve, and that this is necessary because they deserve it. It's fiscally responsible.
Just a few minutes left, a few seconds left. I should point out, if you're successful in August and again in November against your Democratic opponent, you go in January to Lansing, what's the first thing you'd want to do when you walk in that chamber?
Obviously, I would like to look around. Very enjoyable building, but then after that, we need to, the very next day, start working at these exact things that we've outlined here, and that includes getting Hillsdale and Branch County back to work, lowering taxes, bringing up our property values, and doing what's necessary to move Michigan ahead.
We were just talking before we started about kind of a big crowded field in this primary. What makes you get in to this race, and why now?
About a year ago, I told you I'd reenact as Abraham Lincoln. Someone stopped me, as they have for the past 6 or 7 years, and said, "We wish you were running for office." And I thought they were talking like they had during presidential years. And they said, "No, we're talking to the guy underneath the hat this time. We're talking to Hal. We'd like you to consider running for office and for Ken Kurtz's seat because he's term limited." So I said, I don't know. I'll think about it and pray about it, and we'll get back to you. So that was initially why. But secondly, it's because for the last 6 or 7 years as I've done Lincoln, I've been telling people point blank, you need to do what you need to do to be involved. Whether it's just voting, whether it's being in an office, whether it is talking with your coworkers, you need to be active because it matters. So I couldn't get away from my own words and said, maybe this is my time.
What are the issues that bring you to a race like this? Because the environment, if you say you've been portraying Lincoln for 7 or 8 years,
right.
The environment over that period of time has changed dramatically. We had some pretty heady years in the Engler administration. Towards the end of that administration, things began to cool off as the Granholm administration took over. We saw a huge recession, first in Michigan and then across the country, and things have started to change a little bit. So what draws you to this place now from an issue standpoint?
Issues are roads. That's been very drastic, and I'm pleased with something that Bruce Caswell has put out for a possibility to help, but that's just a start. The other issue is, for my tenure in Michigan, which has been 20 years, I've been in the community, over and over I've heard people say, there's just no one that listens to us anyway. I want someone that will listen to us. And part of me is going in to say, I will come to you, I will listen, I will come to the township meetings, I will come to your door. I'll set up a meeting at a coffee shop. I will listen to you and take your ideas back to Lansing. A lot of that is on more of a national scale than it is on a local scale, because we have had some good representatives to follow in the footsteps of, but that's part of it. The other issues are, for me, a moral standpoint. I'm very upset by the fact that a federal judge discounted our Marriage Amendment Act for the state of Michigan, and that's an issue that draws me to the table. Another issue is what I've done for the last 12 years in the nursing home industry. I'd like to see some changes to that industry and see a level-headed field brought to the status for the surveys that they go through each year. That's a few of the things.
Let me go back to roads for a minute. You mentioned Bruce Caswell, who was a senator from this area, a former state representative as well.
Right.
I should point out he's not running for re-election. Senator Caswell has come up, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, with a sales tax proposal.
1% sales tax addition.
To help fix roads. Other proposals have included $100 additional for registration, increasing sales tax on gas, changing the formula for sales tax on gas, which is actually being looked at in the State House even as we speak. Do you have anything with specifics that you either absolutely are for or against in terms of road repair? And are you a subscriber to that $1.2 billion figure that the governor has used as the metric for the next 10 years?
No, that doesn't excite me too much. But he's probably looked at it a lot more than I have. So with all fairness, I can't judge too extremely. What I have done in a rudimentary look at the road situation and talking with a lot of township people is that the percentages in the Act 51 seem to me to be very gracious to MDOT as opposed to the counties and to the local bodies, which I know that the MDOT covers a lot more volume of transportation, but the volume of the actual mileage goes to the townships and the counties, and I think there could be a disparity of how much the money is going to those different locations. I'd like to at least explore the idea of changing those percentages.
Act 51, we should point out for those people who don't know, is the formula by which transportation money gets distributed across the state between MDOT and the county road commissions.
Right.
And so that's what you're talking about. We've got about 45 seconds left in that neighborhood. Let's presume for a moment that you're successful in August and that you prevail against your Democratic opponent in November. And now it's January and you've taken the oath of office and your office is set up. What's the first thing you want to do when you walk into that chamber with your 109 colleagues?
Just get to know them and explore the idea of what we can do the next year to make Michigan a better place, maybe with a top hat on.
With term limits, we have seen increasing numbers of people in primary races, and this is certainly a good example of that. There are a bunch of folks running in the race. Why did you decide to get in, and why now?
Rick, I was fortunate. I had a great upbringing, and I was really taught that we're given an opportunity in this country to learn and to earn and to serve. And growing up, that was just sort of an expectation. You go to school, do a good job. You get a job, provide for your family. If you have an opportunity along the way, serve your community or your country. And this time of term limits lines up with a time in my own personal life where I have an opportunity to devote this full-time effort to this race, and I think do a good job representing the district.
Well, it is a full-time effort when you run for state representative, but it's equally full-time when you're serving.
Right.
And one of the questions that I have for all of the folks running for the State House, not just in this district, but in every district, is what are the issues that drive you to this race? What is it that you want to try to accomplish for the people that you hope to represent?
Well, that's a great question. You know, there's always the kind of the global philosophy that enters into your decision making. You want to have in my case, I have a philosophy that help will not come from Washington. Help will probably come from the states healing themselves with good decisions and doing more positive things and less negative things, and let the states show the way. Really, as far as discrete individual issues, I'm a car dealer. Something that comes to mind, and I've had people say, if you could just do one thing, if you get up there, just do one thing, take a look at car insurance, please. We're just getting killed by car insurance. There's got to be a better way. I think our current no-fault system was designed with the best of intentions, but like, you know, all good intentions, there are sometimes some problems with it. I don't know all the facts. I'm a candidate. I'm not a lawmaker. But I'd like to really look at that and make sure that the system we've got now could be improved so that it's better for more people.
As a car dealer, they all have to have roads to run on, and that has been a big conversation in Lansing for the past couple of decades, and perhaps before that. But as long as I've been covering Lansing, roads have been an issue, but it has become more acute, perhaps because of the bad winter, perhaps because we're getting to the point now where the road deterioration is becoming so acute. There are some answers that people believe they have that include more revenue.
Right.
Some in the State House right now believe they can find existing revenues to make up part of what some think is a $1.2 billion a year for 10-year problem.
Right.
What is your thought when it comes to infrastructure, roads, bridges, and other issues?
Right, infrastructure. You know, our infrastructure was built generations ago for a growing state, and our state now has got to deal with this aging infrastructure with less revenue. So I think the answer is all of the above. You look at for savings wherever you can, and you look at short-term things if they're helpful, if they're not just cosmetic, and you have to have an eye always towards a long-term solution. So I think it's all of the above is the answer. I think it's going to require more revenue. It's going to require probably more diligence in the contracting and the repairs, maybe some more flexibility. We're going to have to maybe give some people some more flexibility in making costs at a lower cost than what they've been quoted before, if it's helpful. You know, all the above. but I think it should be done with an eye towards a long-term solution too.
If there is one thing that the district you hope to represent needs right now, infrastructure is going to be a long-term process, because even if you had the money today, the roads won't be fixed for years.
Right.
But is there something right now that needs to be dealt with in the district?
Well, a lot of these things that our state is facing are problems that have been years in the making, really. They're related to our decline in manufacturing, and they're sort of seismic things that have taken a long time to get us where we are, and they're going to take a while to get back. The things that we would look for are things, again, making a reference to short-term and long-term. Short-term things would be something like this insurance policy. If there's some policy you could look at and make a change with the stroke of a pen, let's look at those things. And let's keep an eye on these big long-term things, such as education is a big thing. I mean, that's something that takes a generation to see the fruition of it. But I think any progress is good progress. I would settle for any step in the right direction, as long as it was in the right direction. And if I was successful, I wouldn't let as the saying goes, I wouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'd find ways to accommodate and work towards a goal without being so dogmatic and all or nothing.
We're almost out of time, but I want to ask this as I have everybody. If you made it all the way through the primary, all the way through the general, you got to Lansing, what's the first thing you'd do when you walked into that chamber?
Well, I hope I'd be holding hands with my wife. I'd probably give her a kiss. And maybe my kids would be there, I don't know. But I think look around, take it in, say a prayer. I think it's a big, important thing. We're blessed in this country. It's a big deal when someone gives you their vote freely. It's a responsibility. It's humbling. I think I'd take a moment and just try to be worthy of that.
When we come back, more of those Republican candidates vying in that primary race in the 58th House District. That's all straight ahead. To the point. Welcome back to the Point. All 110 members in the State House are up for election, and many of the seats are open, like the one in the 58th. That means the current occupant is term limited, and it's creating some big fields of candidates. This is one of the biggest, with 7 vying to replace Ken Kurtz. Now let's hear some more from those 58th district candidates. Why do you decide to run in a crowded field for state representative, knowing it's going to consume a good deal of your spring and early summer, and as we get down into August? I mean, that's a pretty big commitment. What made you decide to run?
Well, I think I can make a difference. I'm very involved in our communities. I'm a small businessman, so I understand what small business is about. But in our business, Q1 Broadcasting, we also produce video for large corporations. So you get a chance to see small and large. And that gives, I think, a unique perspective. And as I'm out and about and talking to people, and whether you're talking about, job retention or agriculture or education, I've got a passion. And I've got a passion to make things better in our community.
What are some of the things that you would like to try to achieve if you're fortunate enough to get through the primary and the general and go to Lansing? You become one of 110. What is it that you would like to take? What's the message, or what are the issues you'd like to work on?
Well, first thing is grow the economy. Because if you grow the economy, you're growing your tax base. In addition, you got to take a look at roads. As we travel every small road around Branch and Hillsdale County, the roads are in terrible shape. The same thing all throughout the state. And you've got to have enough money for the roads. $1.2 billion is the number. And when you take a look at that, you've got, the 1 cent sales tax being proposed by Bruce Caswell, Senator Caswell. You've got the governor has a proposal, the Speaker of the House has a proposal, but you need $1.2 billion. So do you take a little bit from each? Do you take ideas from each to get that number? So I think that's one of the areas that I'm really going to focus on and find out what is the fairest way to fund our roads for everybody who uses the roads. In addition, you've got agriculture, which is as important as manufacturing in our economy. And when you talk about agriculture, I've done a lot of research. I've talked to a lot of farmers out there, and one of the things that keeps coming up is how can we market our products from Michigan around the world? We need a bigger global presence. We need ways to market our products. We need ways to transport our products more efficiently. And that's one of the areas in agriculture. I mean, it's a $90 billion a year industry throughout our country, 1 million jobs. So it's very important. You talk about education in talking to superintendents and principals and parents. That comes down to the equalization of funding from the foundation. And so that's another area. So there's a number of areas that I'm looking at focusing on, and each one takes a lot of information, education, research, and those are some of the things that I'm doing right now.
What do you think when you talked about agriculture pretty extensively? You know that there are a lot of people around the state that are going to say, yes, we think agriculture is important, but agriculture in the state of Michigan is pretty diverse. The specialty crops to the larger row croppers and those who are beef producers or dairy and that type of thing. Can all of those groups work together when it comes to that marketing? Because obviously they have different points of view and different places where they want to market.
Yes, I think they can. And I think that's one of the things that I'm very good at, is bringing people together. And I think we can have meetings. I think we can bring those heads of those particular areas when it comes to agriculture together for the common good. And it takes somebody who can, again, talk the language in each of those areas and say, what is best overall for agriculture? And that's the same thing when you talk about education, you talk about roads, you talk about jobs. What is best for our people? And I think it's an approach that needs to be done. I've never run for office. My name's never been on the ballot, but I'm very involved in our communities and have been for over 30 years. And by being involved, I've got a unique perspective, and whether it's youth sports or some of the other areas that I've talked about, I've got a lot of background in that.
In the 45 seconds or so that we have left, talk to me a little bit about the first thing you would do if you were successful in getting to Lansing. What is the first thing you would do? I mean, forget all of the stuff that you have to do to get an office set up. But what is the first thing you would like to try to accomplish on the floor of the House?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to understand the dynamics of what's going on. There's a lot of seats that are open right now, so you're going to have a lot of new representatives in the House. And I think the first thing you've got to do is take a look at the dynamics, take a look at what bills are in legislation right now, and then kind of go from there. But in addition, the first thing I'd like to do is I've got groups of ag people, education people, I've got road commission people, I've got a variety of people that I can learn from. And I think you got to, as a state representative, if you take a look at what is your job, is to represent the people. And to do that, you've got to meet the people and understand their issues. And I think that's one of the very first things that I would do is set up meetings, get there, go to Lansing, and then understand what's happening in the state.
First question is always the simplest, and that's why did you decide to run for this office, and why did you decide to run now?
Okay. I decided to run for this office as a place to start. I decided to run now. I had prayed about it for some time. This is the direction God had led me in, and for about 10 years or so I've had a lot of people in different areas and arenas of life who have asked me to and wanted me to run for office.
Talk to me about your background and your qualifications. What brings you to this point where you think this is a good fit for you?
I have recently, it was probably about a year before I had announced that I had graduated with my most recent master's degree, and so I now have the time and I'm ready to serve.
What are the big issues that face this district, and what are the things that you want to focus on, both as you talk to voters leading up to the August primary, and if you're successful in August and again in November? What is it that you want to start working on in Lansing?
Okay. One of the big issues is Obamacare. However, there's not a whole lot that a state representative can do. We can work with the national government, with our representatives and senators in D.C., but to work on eliminating that, I've been, I guess you could say, a victim of Obamacare, IRS regulations. I was working sometimes over 40 hours a week, and my job got cut pretty much in half so that they wouldn't have to pay benefits. And so Obamacare is a big issue. It's affecting especially seniors in a lot of negative ways. Education, that is a very hot topic. A lot of groups are trying to put their input into Lansing to determine how teachers should be evaluated, what should be taught in classrooms, what type of content, what should be able to be stated, all sorts of issues that are affecting teachers, kids, their families on a daily basis. And there's a lot of things that need to be taken a closer look at, including Common Core.
Well, tell me about Common Core. What is your take on Common Core? What do you want looked at Common Core?
Okay. what I would like to have looked at in Common Core is how it's being implemented. Some of the standards I actually agree with, and I like some of the standards. I like the idea of having a nationalized goal to gauge every state by and just have something in common that we can work with. But some of the ways that it's being implemented is improper. It's socially dogmatic, and some of the material being used, for instance, like a history book that I've come across has portrays Gorbachev and Russia as being a very good thing, and our President Reagan as being a very bad thing. So that's the portrayal, and that's through someone that spoke at Hillsdale College. And I've also seen a lot of other things personally, like I'm a part-time teacher at Jackson College, and some students have come up to me showing me stuff that's being taught in math classes where it's called like fuzzy math, and they're supposed to interpret math instead of solving it, and interpreting problems and describe how the problem makes you feel if you can't solve it. I don't understand how that's going to help our students learn and grow.
Beyond education, obviously, you have a passion for that. And talking about the Affordable Care Act, you correctly identify the limited amount of impact that you can have as a state representative on that. But when you look at your district, what are the issues, perhaps beyond education, that may impact positively the people that you hope to represent that you want to work on?
Well, agriculture I know is a big one. We live in a very big agricultural community. I tend to have a passion for things of agriculture and environment. I grew up in an environment like that, and I love to be outside. I love to be around woods. I love to be around fields, streams, stuff like that. So anything that I can do to help the environment, help people who work with the environment, and help people who, for instance, grow food and put food on our tables. And if we can keep that in Michigan, keep that growing. I know roads is another big issue that keeps being talked about. I know there's other issues, but roads is a big one. And we need help to get our roads fixed so we can travel safely down the road. Those are a couple of them.
Finally, we got about 45 seconds or so left. Let's say that you're successful in August, you're successful in November, you're sworn in January. What's the first thing you're going to do when you hit the ground running in Lansing? What is the first initiative or the first priority for you if you are successful?
Reinforce to the people who voted for me that I'm going to stand up for them. I'm going to be an ear to whatever they have to say. I listen pretty much to any viewpoint, regardless of my own, and I'm always willing to learn from other people, and to be a voice of reason within the legislature, and to be a voice of reason for the people in itself. And my first steps is going to be trying to do whatever I can to restore and retain the vision that our founding fathers had for this country and the freedoms that this republic has given us.
And there are still more candidates that are looking to win a primary race come August. You'll hear from more of them when we come back to The Point. The State House, as you know, is comprised of 110 individuals, and every 2 years, every seat is up for a vote. Every 6 years, someone can be term limited, and that's what happened in the 58th District. That's Branch and Hillsdale County, where Kenneth Kurtz can no longer run. There are 7 Republicans that are trying to replace them. Now you'll hear from the rest of the field. You're running for state representative, first time to run for public office. I think we were talking about just before we went on the air. What makes you decide to run for something like this?
Well, I've been a Republican for a long time and part of the Hillsdale County Republican Executive Committee for 10 years and secretary for 7. And it came up that this was the next election. Ken Kurtz is term limited, so that it will be an open seat. And I had some folks that said I ought to consider it, so I did. And when I considered it and prayed about it, this is the answer. So,
why do you want to run now? What is it that you want to accomplish?
Personally, I would like to see the traditional definition of marriage still continue to be upheld. And I would also like to see us have more exploration of educational opportunities. We already have a number of things in place, career technical education, dual enrollment for schools, for college, for high school students, and those are not being utilized. I think that holding to a high standard of quality education is important also. I'm also interested in business. We had a recession where we had 20% unemployment in this county and in Hillsdale County. That's too high. So I'd like to see business do better because we should have had the opportunity to have an inflow of new business at that point. We had the people. We should have had the business. So these are all issues that I'm interested in. Agriculture is our second largest industry in the state, and it's our first largest industry in this district, and I'd like to see that supported as well.
When you talk about business, what do you think that the state can do, the government of the state can do when it comes to business? Because there would be those who would look at the performance, speaking of the administrations of both the Snyder administration and the 8 years of the Granholm administration. They certainly spent a lot of time doing things that they hoped would help business. What do you think state should be doing to help business locate here?
Well, my first degree is in mechanical engineering, so I've worked at a corporate level, and I'm familiar with businesses between that level and the small personal business person. And I think that there are a number of things that we can do in this area. I would like to see us have less regulation, not so much the necessary regulation, but the unnecessary regulation. The onerous regulation of 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, 15 people working for a company or for a business, and just having to hire an extra person just to take care of the paperwork is onerous. And there are other things that are like that I think that we can do here.
When you look at your experience, both being involved in politics and obviously with your background in the workplace, what makes you uniquely qualified among this large field of candidates?
Oh, wow. I think that it's because I feel that I have the broadest grasp of the most number of issues of any of the candidates who are running. And I carry in my heart the concerns of the people more than I carry in my heart the concerns of the issues. And I think that also qualifies me.
You have, as we have pointed out, a big field of candidates in this primary. If you are successful in August, and if you were successful against the Democratic opponent in November, we fast forward to January and you're in Lansing. What's the first thing that you want to try to accomplish after being sworn in and setting up the office and all the things that have to happen? What's the first thing you'd like to accomplish?
I think the first thing I'd like to accomplish is I'd like to see, for me personally, one that would be a win right off the bat, would be to encourage our schools to encourage students to explore their educational opportunities and to get away from the idea of one size fits all for education.
Have you given any consideration to the funding of education in the state? Because you've mentioned a couple of times now your interest in broadening the availability of some of the courses that are out there. But what we hear most about in Lansing is not so much how to educate, but how to pay for education. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I believe that the funding for education is already pretty much in place. And we already have many of these opportunities available to us, and they would not cost us more dollars. Career technical education is already in place. Dual enrollment for college is already in place. I think that there are some places where our legislative process is just holding us back from utilizing those. So funding for education for those particular programs is not, I don't see that as being an extensive issue. As far as funding regular education, we already have a plan in place, and I think that it works well. We need to do a better job of finding efficient methods to utilize the dollars that we have.
You have a lot of company in this race. It's a crowded field in this State House primary. What made you decide to get into this race, and why'd you do it now?
Well, for the past 5.5 years, I've served as the Hillsdale County Commissioner. And so this is a natural movement upwards. With term limits in Michigan, it creates a vacancy every 6 years and creates people who have been, say, on the farm team, who have been learning the ropes, learning how things work and creating policy, learning how to do constituent service. And so that creates an opportunity to move upwards into the state legislature.
When you look at the problems that face this district or the issues that you would like to address, what are those things that drive you to run from an issue perspective?
Well, from an issue perspective, it really is this, that Michigan has a problem in regards to overregulation and a lack of local control. And as a county commissioner, having sat through in excess of 500 units of local government's monthly meetings, that I've come to see that the state continues to impose more and more regulation on local government and provides less and less funding for them to be able to do the things. And so really what this is all about is local control, to return that back to local units of government, whether it be schools or townships or villages or cities.
Control and finances, those are perhaps two different issues, but they have very similar paths, because revenue sharing has been diminished for municipalities over the course of time, and for counties it is almost non-existent in some cases. So is it your effort to get more money back from the state, or just tell them keep your money and keep your regulations?
Well, there are really two pieces of that. First of all, that revenue sharing is an agreement that was made back in the 60s between local government and the state, that in return for not being able to collect local sales taxes, that the state would share a portion of the sales taxes that were collected within that unit of government. And so consequently, we do need to continue to do that. We need to have those dollars flow back to those local units so that they can provide the services that the constituents have come to depend on. However, the other issue is the local control of how those dollars are spent. That we, back in the 1980s, we said in Michigan, in the Constitution, we could not have unfunded mandates. And there are approximately $2.5 billion a year in unfunded mandates. And so therefore, what I want to be is a strong voice to simply say that if the legislature is going to put requirements on local government, they need to fund them. And if they are not going to fund them, they need to allow the local units to be able to make those decisions on how they want to spend the dollars that they have available to them.
As a county commissioner, I have to believe you hear a lot about roads, because that has been one of the big conversations in this state for decades. And in the last 2 or 3 years, it's gotten a lot of lip service. So far, no particular overall fix. What is your take on road funding, particularly as it pertains to the district that you hope to represent in those individual counties?
Well, the thing on people's lips really is roads and jobs. And so to address the issue of roads, that yes, we do have about $1 billion a year shortage in road funding in Michigan. The first thing that we can do is simply to make the dollars go further by removing the burden of regulation and also creating, again, more local control with those dollars. We used to do in Michigan what was called a buyout of Michigan Transportation, MTF funds. And what that would simply do is it would strip away things like prevailing wage and other requirements that flow down from the feds to the state level, then to the local level. So by returning back to that buyback, and what it simply is that local road commissions would sell those MTF funds back to the Michigan Department of Transportation at about 70 cents on the dollar. And that would then strip off that excessive regulatory burden and allow for them to have much more local control over it and make those dollars go further. And so that would be the first thing that I would be looking at, is to try and return the funding back so that MDOT has the dollars to be able to buy those dollars back, and we can produce that local control with those dollars. Again, looking at regulatory burden, there are a number of things that we can do. It is rather ridiculous that when we rebuild a road that has existed for 100 years and it happens to go through a low-lying area, that we have to mitigate 3 acres of wetland for every acre that we displace in filling out the shoulders so that we can drive cars down the road at 55 or 60 miles an hour, rather than 100 years ago when we were driving down the roads at 10 miles an hour in a horse and buggy. And so things like that, if we relieve that regulatory burden, we can make those dollars go much, much further. The other thing is that we in Michigan are one of the few states that collects sales tax on a gallon of gasoline. However, that sales tax goes into the general fund. It does not go to roads. We need to take and dedicate the 4 cents of the 6 cents a gallon, or a dollar that is collected on a gallon of gasoline. We need to dedicate that to the transportation fund and allow it to be used for roads.
Final question, about 30 seconds. If you prevail in August, if you prevail in November, it's now January, you're walking into the House of Representatives as a newly elected member, what's the first thing you do?
Very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to seek out the people who have been there, listen to them, and to try and take off on their experience, and to see how that I can best fit in and be most effective as being part of the team that will be elected and take office in January.
So there's the big field from the 58th, but it's not just about state House seats. Every state Senate seat is up in this election cycle, and there's some primary action there too. We'll take a look at one of those races closer to home. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Up until now, you have seen one big field of Republican candidates vying for a House seat in the southern part of our viewing area. Now in Kent County, there are two Democrats who would like to take on Republican Dave Hildenbrand for that 29th Senate seat. You'll hear from them right now. To the point. Running for public office is always a big decision, and running for the state Senate is a big leap. Why did you decide to run for this office right now?
Well, Rick, I feel that I'm truly duly prepared, worthy, and well qualified. I have the education, the managerial skills, and the experience. I have a master's degree in correctional and criminal justice, a bachelor's degree in public administration. I completed my practicum with the Cook County Public Defender's Investigation Office, where I had the opportunity to work on high-profile murder cases. I was given the opportunity 10 years ago to work for this county by the Kent County Board of Commissioners. I was appointed as one of the board of directors for the Kent County Department of Human Services. I listened to hundreds of presentations by organizations and social service agencies. I made decisions after reading hundreds of proposals on policies and funding. Coupled with that, having the opportunity to go to Lansing and lobby legislators on public policy that affected us here in Kent County, along with lobbying for the money to get the $27 million to build the Kent County Department of Human Service complex. I did a great job in the past, and I'm looking to do a good job in the future if this community will give me a chance to serve them again.
There are a lot of issues that face the state of Michigan, and depending on geography, because we do a lot of these primary races, it changes a bit from place to place. What do you see when you look at the district that you hope to represent? What do you see as the most pressing issues? What are the things that you would like to work on if you were elected during the primary and then again during the general?
Well, I see three areas, not just for this local community, for the state as a whole. Privatizing prisons, foster care, education. Seem like those three services is always at the bottom, never being fixed. When we look at privatization of prisons, they have House Bill 5174 that might hit the table again, where we have a company called GEO, Correctional Corporation of America, said to this state of Michigan, we will run your prisons for you if you give us a 90% guarantee occupancy rate. That is unreasonable. When we look at privatization of foster care, where here this Michigan legislator a couple of years ago snuck it down in the budget, mandating the county of Kent to go to 100% purchase of services, privatizing foster care, taking children out the home for very little reason, practically none at all, shipping them out to other counties, placing them in other counties, making it difficult for parents to get their children back. Social service agencies facilitating with no checks and balances or very little checks and balances. It would not show the exactitude that we as residents would want. When we look at privatization of education, we look at EAA, Education Achievement Authority, more charter schools. They're taking children's and funding out the school district, normally after count day, and normally after some of those charter schools do not want to facilitate those children, end up back in the school district. That money don't follow them back. So that means that services is not being implemented. If IEPs, biopsychosocials, was written, a treatment plan, then if that treatment plan is not serviced, then those mental and negative behaviors is not addressed. Students end up getting suspended. They fall into that realm of the school to prison pipeline. There are other issues that are just as important as those three. Here in Kent County, we have ZIP plus 4, jury selection. Just talked the other day to a lady, 74 years old, never been invited to serve on a jury. I believe a system like that needs to be implemented throughout the state. When I look at the emergency manager law, I think that's taxation without representation. Benton Harbor, Muskegon, Flint, Pontiac, we don't do right by them. We have to look at the emergency management legislation and see if we can do some other things to help local government. When I look at the budget, I look at this governor, and his way of doing things is unacceptable. Taking one money from one line item, put them in another, and then it's like stealing from Peter to pay Paul, doing less than taking candy from a baby. When we look at our senior citizens, they taxing their pension. That's unacceptable. They raping local government. They took away revenue sharing. We have to feed for ourselves. Legislators that brag about a $1 billion surplus, but they don't want to fix our roads. Then we as residents of this community have to sign a 15-year road tax. We don't mind paying those tax, but I think the partnership that this state has said that it would do for us have fallen short.
You've decided to run for office. That's a big decision. Why did you decide to run for this office, and why did you decide to run now?
Well, I decided to run because I've been watching what's going on in Lansing, and I'm unhappy in the extreme with the policy that's coming out of Lansing. I have three girls in elementary school, and you look at the education cuts that have taken place. I mean, that's money that's coming out of my kids' school budget. So, you know, that's one policy that needs to change. There's a host of them. I really don't like the direction that the Republican majority in Lansing has taken things in this state. And I could go on about a number of things, but and I'm running for state senate because it's somewhere where you can get something done and where change needs to happen. I mean, it's a Republican supermajority right now, as you know, and we need some change down there, and there didn't seem to be anybody else stepping forward, and I felt compelled to run.
You bring up education, which is going to be a pivotal part of this year's election narrative. Mm-hmm. Democrats are going to say that education funding has been cut, and if you look at the dollars and cents, there's certainly stimulus money that was there that is not there. If you look at the school aid fund money that's going in, some of it is being directed away from per pupil funding. Republicans will say, wait a minute, that money's still going into education, it's just not going into the same place. That argument is going to be going on all through this race. So if you are successful in August and we're successful in November, what would you want to do to change the way education is funded?
Well, I take a different approach than the person who holds my position right now, Senator Hildenbrand. He's voted against over $4 billion in cuts to public education. And he's voted consistently in favor of charter schools, cyber schools, that sort of thing. To me, that looks like an effort to privatize public education. I'm a product of public education. My parents both worked in public education. That's where most Michiganders are educated, is in the public schools. So I want to focus on putting money back into public education and get away from what the Republican majority seems to be doing, which is pushing for more charter schools and more private forms of education. You know, there's all kinds of arguments you can make about what's happened over the last 4 years, but the simple matter to me is there was this amount, there's now this amount. You know, there was some taken out, some put back in, there was money moved around. That's, you know, the total money is less than what it was and in public education, and that needs to change.
In addition to education, and as I pointed out, that is going to be a very top shelf issue, in not just in this race, but in races across the state. But in addition to education, what are things that when you look at the state or when you look at state government and you say, I want to change that?
Well, I think we all agree that the roads need some attention. And I mean, this is an interesting thing to me because the governor is the one that's proposing, I think, about $2 billion in road funding, and he can't even get his own party to give him that. I mean, that's a real indication that of how far astray Lansing has gone from what the people need to have happen. So we need to get some major action on the roads. I think, there's plenty of blame to go around. It's a situation that's developed over a lot of years, but I think everybody now, after this severe winter we've had, can see that the roads need an awful lot of attention. And it doesn't seem that, they do these little patch things, these small appropriations to kind of patch things, and I think people know that something bigger needs to be done. So that's a big thing. Another thing is with the budget, and taxation, is that, again, my opponent seems to have plenty of votes to give tax breaks and tax loopholes to big corporations and sort of, I would suggest, sort of to his backers, to the sort of folks that are backing his political career. But he voted against the earned income tax credit. He's voted against tax credits for the disabled, for charities. So I want to look at policies that I think help the middle class. And a lot of that is in the budget. I mean, that's one of the biggest things they do in Lansing is budget and taxation issues. So I would be looking at those range of issues a lot.
You started off talking about education, and so we may end up in the same place, but let's just say it is January of next year. You've taken the oath of office. All the formalities are out of the way, and you walk in to the chamber without regard to whether you're in the majority or in the minority. What's the first thing you would do?
The first thing I would do is propose to increase funding for public education. I read a study just the other day that, I forget where the school district was, but it was kind of an experiment. They tried over a number of years just increasing the budget, just increasing the general budget of the school district. Their graduation rate shot up by about 20%. I can get you the actual study if you want to see it. But, there's this notion, the problem with the current approach to education is that I really think that there's an effort to cut to the point where public education can't function. Then they turn around and say, look, it doesn't work. We got to have charter schools, cyber schools, private schools, all this, the public money should go over here instead of to the existing public school system. I totally oppose that approach. I think the public schools have worked. They're a part of this country's history for a reason. Most of our presidents have gone to public schools. So I want to fix the public schools, not just for my kids, but for all the kids in Michigan.
And those are just a few of the many races that we'll be following leading up to the August primary. And of course, we'll have a lot more coverage of Decision 2014 as time goes on, and I'll have a final thought when we come back to the point. I failed to mention earlier that those 7 Republicans that are vying for the nomination in the 58th are looking for the right to face Democrat Thomas Amarilius in November. Well, that's another look at a bunch of primary races here in West Michigan. There are many more to go, and of course, a lot more to talk about, including what's going on in Detroit and some new legislation out of Lansing. We'll do all of that next week when you join us to The Point.